Greetings and welcome to a Future Transform recording. This is from July of 2025, and the guest is a real star, one that we've really enjoyed hosting in the past. So to back up a bit, in January of 2025, we hosted Professor Robert Kelchen, a higher education professor, to talk to us about the state of higher ed. We treated it kind of tongue-in-cheek as like a physician's visit to get a sense of a checkup on the health of colleges and universities. And that was a great conversation. I have a link to it in the show notes. But then, since then, obviously, over the past 6 months, quite a few things have happened to higher education, including the Trump administration's campaign against academia. So we wanted to bring back Professor Kelchen to first assess what Trump has been doing to higher ed, but also to give us a sense of what we should expect for the upcoming fall semester. Now, in this conversation, by the way, if you're new to the forum, conversation is the theme. I'm the host, I'm the curator, and I begin by asking a couple of questions, but most of the hour is devoted to the audience, to their questions and their comments. And the audience and Professor Kelchen drove quite a discussion. We touched on, really quickly, international students, the impact of the big beautiful bill, which you just passed when we recorded this, individual states' politics, certificates, enrollment, alternative revenue sources, threats to institutional autonomy and academic freedom, the Department of Education changes, financial aid, community colleges, and the life-changing benefits of colleges and universities. I think it was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy. Please comment as you like, share. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, like and subscribe, as they say. Ready? Why don't we start our program? Welcome, everybody. Greetings and welcome to the Future Transform. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today. We have a fantastic guest, and he's talking on the subject of a great deal of interest for all of us. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Professor Robert Kelchen is someone that I spend a lot of time following. He is a professor of higher education. He works in this field, but he's also a public intellectual. He is constantly, it seems to me, writing articles, being interviewed, and talking about where things are headed in higher education. He has a phenomenal grasp of the data, and he also just constantly researches all the many details of our complex world. So first, I just have to say, Professor Kelchen, welcome. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing all right. It is a wild and crazy time in our field.
It is indeed. It is indeed. We'll be talking about that. But listen, by the way, friends, if you haven't met Robert Kelchen, well, now you have. If you haven't followed his work, you absolutely have to, and you'll see why in a minute. We hosted him as a guest about half a year ago, and I brought him on as and the gimmick I came up with was that he was kind of a a practitioner who was going to give us a diagnosis about the patient's health, and the patient being higher education. And since that time has happened, we've hit quite a few ailments, I believe. But one of the things I did do, Robert, was I asked you if you could talk about what you're going to be working on next. What's ahead for you for the next 12 months? I gather you're not going to be teaching any classes this fall because you're running an academic department of some heft. What else are you going to be up to?
In terms of research, I am working on a project looking at how colleges spend their money. I got some really fascinating data from Helio campus, which
Hmm.
provides various services for a number of large institutions, predominantly publics. And I'm going to be looking at basically programmatic spending. How do colleges spend their money? What do they spend on administration versus research versus teaching? Just to get a sense of where the money is going and
Nice.
especially how colleges are responding to budget cuts. So
Hmm.
I'm looking at that from a research perspective. And also, I've been spending much of the last decade looking at trends in state higher education funding models in the US. And my meeting right before this one was with my research team,
Hmm.
talking about the nitty-gritty of basically how states try to allocate money. And often it's more of a show than anything else in the sense that you'll more or less get whatever you got last year, no matter how fancy the formula is.
Mm.
And then
Hmm.
it's just trying to quantify that.
Well, these are two fantastic topics to dive into, Robert. I can't wait to see what you come up with. The what colleges spend. I would love to use that in my classes, actually.
Yeah.
Um, And of course, changes in state funding is something that we scrutinize a great deal. Did you did you see that wonderful quote from the University of Michigan's previous president, James Duderstadt, about this?
What was that quote?
He said, "Friends, you may have heard this. I'm going to paraphrase. He says, I used to describe the University of Michigan as a state-supported institution. Then I called it a state-assisted institution. Then I called it a state-located institution, and now I refer to it as a state-molested institution."
Oh,
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you can find this online. I've blogged this before, but that's an extreme example, but it's a fun one. You might want to use that. Um, but those sound terrific, and I can't wait to see what comes. Friends, I'm going to ask Robert a couple of quick questions to start things off. But please start thinking yourself about what questions you'd like to ask as we think about higher education over the next academic year. So, what might be happening to and within colleges and universities fall 2025, winter, spring 2026? Um, and one, I guess the not exactly an elephant in the room, but a big question to ask is, what do you think? What should we anticipate as a result of the Trump administration's many actions? Everything from cutting research funds to tightening visa restrictions on international students to interfering with the autonomy of some universities and so on. What kind of damage and what opportunities, if any, should we expect?
I think the first key takeaway is finances across much of higher ed are in a really fragile place right now. Prior to January of 25, there were a couple hundred institutions that were doing really well, primarily our bigger research institutions.
Mhm.
And those have been the ones that have been hit hardest to this point by cuts to research funding and the potential loss of international students. There was a data point that came out just in the last day that the number of student visas is down 20% year over year as of
Mhm.
May. And that's even before the pause in scheduling new visa interviews.
20%.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
just as a faculty member, I'm trying to help, well, at least listening to potential international students who are just lost. They cannot get a visa appointment to come to the US. They're
Mhm.
accepted and they're stuck, and appointments are 6, 9, 12 months out.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So if we should expect something, even a decline in international enrollment even steeper than 20%.
I think that maybe a little bit longer term. Students who are here in the US are generally okay, but the
Hmm.
number of new international students is going
Mm.
to
Mm.
decline substantially.
I see. I see.
And I see Tom's comment in the chat or the question about how are community colleges looking. At this point, community colleges are relatively unaffected. The the big effects are the research institutions and then some of the regional public and private institutions where they're not getting research funding, but a number of the big public flagship universities have responded to losses in international students or losses in research funding by trying to expand their enrollment. So they're pulling off their wait list, which are pulling students from primarily our regionally focused four-year institutions. And state funding right now actually looks pretty good. From an
Yeah.
affordability perspective, we're in the best place in higher ed that we've been in at least 10 years. But the odds of state funding going up in the next year are pretty slim just because state budgets were tightening as the economy slowed down post-pandemic. And now with the real possibility of states having to absorb portions of what the federal government has done, I think state budget cuts are quite possible, and flat funding is a pretty good outcome.
So thinking about the big beautiful bill and cuts to Medicaid, which states may have to absorb, and then they would choose to fund that instead of public universities.
Yes, the biggest concern immediately is cuts to food assistance, which
Mm.
take
Mm.
effect quicker. The Medicaid cuts, they may never take effect.
Mm.
The way that a lot of that law was written was the benefits take effect quickly, the cuts
Mm.
take effect in a few years, hopefully past whatever
Mm.
election.
Hmm.
And given our history of just continuing to go deeper and deeper into debt, I
Yeah.
think we may not see some of those unless the Democrats decide we won't bring back Medicaid unless we get other things that we want. And
Hmm.
that's a political challenge for Democrats as well.
Wow. Well, let's for the moment let's stick on the international student dimension because the chat has got a whole bunch of questions about this, and I think this is very important. Of course, friends, if this isn't even tracking, international enrollment has been a significant factor in American higher education for about 30 years, and some universities and colleges really depend on international enrollment, especially that international students tend to be more likely to be full pay students than domestic ones. Lisa Durf, our dear friend, asks one quick question. Can international students attend online instead?
If they stay in their home country and the program's available online, they
Ah,
typically can.
mhm.
But the reason why a lot of students want to come study at US institutions is also to be in the US, and not every program is available online. And what students cannot do generally is be in the US and take predominantly online classes.
Got it. Got it. Good question, Lisa, and thank you, Robert, for a really clear answer. Keenan Salinero asks about a specific program. NIH got notified 2 weeks ago they can no longer accept postdocs with international funding, which means they're having to let go of international students with support from either their home countries or Rhodes Scholars, other scholar program recipients. Do you want to respond to that or riff on that?
There's been a lot of scrutiny of international funding more broadly, so I'm not surprised by that change.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Good one, Ken. Maria Polchotsky mentions that historically, in Trump's first administration, some international students were deciding not to study in the US because of how unwelcome they felt or even unsafe. And I know I hear this from anecdotally from quite a few international students from Asia. They're very worried about anti-Asian sentiment, but also about general issues of safety. Are you seeing any of that right now, Robert?
That's likely driving part of the decline in international student enrollment. The challenge that international students have at this point is a number of the other English speaking countries with internationally renowned higher ed systems are also cutting international enrollment. Thinking
Yeah.
of Canada, UK, and Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a combination of anti-immigrant sentiment and also at least stated concerns about the number of international students driving up local housing prices.
It's a big deal for Canada, especially
Yeah.
Ontario. Yeah, I thought that would have been a great opportunity for American higher education to welcome more international students, but we're going the other way. Maria, please, if your mic works, please go ahead.
Yeah, it does. I just wanted
Heck,
to take my turn after
please.
everybody else finished speaking. So, yeah, definitely there are many countries, and they don't have to be English speaking, right, that are attractive to international students like France, right? There are international students who speak French as well as English or even better. And I would add that students from Asian countries are not the only ones who have reason to fear xenophobia or anything like that because people are just so ignorant that they see anybody brown skinned, let's say, and they make assumptions. This is an Arab, this is a person from the Middle East, as it's usually called, and so they feel unsafe, but also, and this makes a lot of sense. Why should they spend their family's money, their time, and just intellectually contribute to the development of a country where they're not wanted, right? And that's probably painfully obvious to everybody, but it bears articulating. So
It does. Maria, thank you. Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. There's the welcomeness toward international students, international scholars is a real concern. And it's also a challenge given just the institutions that have space to accept students, the institutions hiring employees may not be always in the biggest cities that are always the most immigrant friendly as well.
Mm, mm. Very good point. Very good point. The traditions of that are very strong. So international students, that's one part of the overall problem. Um, Phil Katz, our really good friend, asks, he's been reading Professor Kelchen's recent paper on return on investment from the growing number of master's programs. How is the graduate landscape likely to change, given recent changes to policy, demographics, and everything else? And does that,
I've been saying partially in jest for years that the Federal Higher Education Act was last reauthorized in 2008, and I've been joking that I'll be retired before it's reauthorized again. I still think that may very well be the case, but in the reconciliation law that passed a couple weeks ago, we had the biggest set of changes to federal higher education policy since at least 1992.
Hmm.
And the effects on graduate education were particularly notable because it included eliminating the Grad Plus loan program and putting loan limits on graduate and professional schools, which take us back policy-wise to about 2005. And what that means is for many programs, in order to be a full-time student, you're going to have to be able to have private savings, an assistantship, which an assistantship is going to be increasingly hard to find given the research environment, or you're going to the private lending market, which will exist in certain fields of study and not others. So given all that, there is going to be substantial changes to graduate enrollment. And then a further complexity on all this is there are separate loan limits for graduate students versus professional students. The loan limit for graduate programs is 100,000, professional programs is 200,000. If you read the law, they do not define what a professional program is. And is there anyone at the Department of Education to issue guidance on this? Probably, but the person also has 7 other jobs.
Right.
So we don't actually know how much certain programs can borrow, and that's a big concern. And policymakers have been concerned for years about the growth in graduate student debt, which is about half of all new student debt issued each year. And this led me to look at a research project on when universities start new master's programs, do the students at least have decent economic outcomes, or is the main goal of these programs seemingly to generate revenue for universities? And surprisingly, the new programs that are started, the labor market outcomes are pretty similar to existing programs in the same field of study. So it's not
good, isn't it?
it's good. It's not just a ripoff for institutions getting money, although they're certainly benefiting from that as well.
Well, thank you for that very, very detailed answer with a lot for us to be concerned about. And Phil Katz has already made a horrified face in the chat in response, which is quite understandable. Thank you, Phil, for raising that paper and the topic it describes. Alexander Lester continues along this professional degree angle by asking if we'll see an enrollment drop due to the cap on the annual lifetime limit. And he hones this by saying, any projected numbers or potential number of program closures as a result.
I don't think we'll see it because of that change this year, because the change does not go into effect until next year. And students have largely made decisions on what to do in the fall. But will we see an enrollment drop? Quite possibly just because of international students. But also for certain fields like law, it's possible we see an increase just because of people trying to get into a field where they think they can do something good. We saw this during the first Trump administration, for example.
And during the pandemic in 2020, people wanting to sign up for public health, for example.
Yes.
We have Jennifer Culver has a great question, a specific, very detailed question. How do you think this will impact students with disabilities enrolling or those students feeling they can succeed?
That's a good question. I don't have a great answer to that. Part of that may also be a little bit of a longer term effect, depending on what happens with anything involving individual education plans and K-12 education and how
Mm.
that transfers to higher ed.
What did the One Big Beautiful Bill do to K through 12 education?
It didn't do that much in the grand scheme of things. The big changes are happening either just through administrative actions or, for example, things that Doge did. But what
Mm.
I'm watching now is the next budget bill coming in for fiscal 26,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which, if prior experience is any guide, will get just a series of just short-term extensions, and they'll try to figure it out right before the end of December. But what's also new this time around is rescissions, where the administration is refusing to spend money that's already been allocated. And we've seen that already to the tune of $7 billion in K-12 education, to the point where 10 Republican senators sent a letter yesterday saying, don't do this.
Wow, breaking the ranks.
Yeah.
Jennifer adds to this that she's worried about services and such, especially since some elements are mandated. Um, Jennifer,
What does mandated mean right now?
wow, wow. Given clawbacks and rescissions, right?
And just the ability of, even if everyone at the Department of Education is well-meaning, do they have the people to process anything in a meaningful way? And
Right.
then, yeah, it's
All.
the landscape has completely changed since 6 months ago.
Mm. Jennifer, thank you for the questions about an especially important population in our uh, campuses. Everybody, again, if you're new to the forum, this is the kind of thing that we do where we have lots of questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A box if you like, or keep running with the chat. I'm happy to monitor it. And I promised to ask a couple of questions, and Robert, I did want to raise another topic,
Sure.
which is, you and I and others have been talking about how, until recently, the most elite institutions, that is, the wealthiest ones, the ones with the highest reputations, tend to be able to go above any crisis that afflicts the rest of higher education. That has changed this year for some of them with the major cuts to federal research outlays. And these have been aimed specifically at great research institutions, Princeton, Harvard, Columbia, and so on. I'm curious, just looking ahead to the next year, what kind of effects should we anticipate from all of these federally funded research cuts and reductions?
A number of the biggest research universities are already making major cuts as a response. And the number of incoming PhD students in particular has been slashed, just because universities have no idea what their funding situation is going to look like.
Mm.
Just our research infrastructure is taking major hits, and very quickly. And then just how the entire situation with the Ivy League institutions plays out,
Hmm.
it remains to be seen a little bit. Will Harvard or Columbia end up negotiating some kind of deal?
Hmm.
Media coverage is suggesting maybe,
Hmm.
but it really depends on how much the institution and alumni and donors end up pushing back. And the one thing the administration has not gone directly for yet is financial aid to students. They're
Hmm.
going at it indirectly through accreditation by
Hmm.
threatening Harvard and Columbia's accreditation. But federal financial aid is not a great lever over Harvard, because it's approximately $100 million out of a $6 billion budget.
Hmm.
But what I'll be watching is, do these threats of investigations continue to come for other institutions, particularly the big blue state publics? Because the administration is trying to figure out how far they can take this and still get significant support from the base and still get significant attention.
So big blue state universities like University of California system, the
Yes,
University of New York system.
yes. And the State University of New York system is a particularly good target, because the leader of that system was a former U.S. Secretary of Education under a Democratic administration.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very scary but very, very useful insight for us to watch out for. Thank you. Uh, Again, friends, I only ask a couple of questions because the floor is mostly for all of you. So I'm going to retreat back and try and bring up all of your other questions and comments. Alan Konopka, I believe. Alan, if I mispronounced the last name, please, my apologies. He asked a question about the Republican Party in general. He points out that Indiana, again, a state led by the Republican Party, Indiana legislators and others have demanded majors be eliminated if few students graduate per year in them. I presume they think this will shrink faculty for cost saving. Is there any data on relation between number of different majors and faculty size?
There are a lot of majors that are pretty small, that only have a couple of graduates per year. And we're seeing this beyond just state requirements. I think of what West Virginia University did a few years ago and made major cuts to the number of academic programs, basically on the number of graduates per year. As a department head, as an academic administrator, this is a really silly way to do things. If the goal is efficiency, as long as you have butts in seats, I don't care how many majors you have. If you can run your classes with enough students, you can generate enough student credit hours. To me, it doesn't matter where the students come from. It's just, are you using your faculty appropriately and efficiently? But that's a little bit more nuanced story than just cut everything with fewer than 3 graduates per year.
So you may have a department where they don't graduate many majors, but they teach a lot of classes for general education or for service.
Yeah, or people pick up minors. Foreign languages are a great example of that. And those are some of the most painful cuts at Indiana, because that was one of the best places in the country to study strategically important foreign languages. But they only got a couple students a year, at least graduating.
What do you mean by strategically important? For American foreign policy? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
It was one of the great places to study, for example, the Slavic languages, which are a little bit important right now.
I think my first Russian textbook was written by an Indiana professor. Phil Katz notes that in all of our discussion here, it's going to be harder to understand how this actually plays out because there's so many cuts to the research wing of the Department of Education. So in terms of gathering data and being able to analyze it, it's going to be more difficult. Thank you, Phil.
It is going to be more difficult. A few of the contracts for federal data collection have been restored in recent months very quietly. And that means the data cuts may not be quite as bad as initially feared, but I'll believe it when I see it in terms of bringing in additional data.
Okay, good point. Good point. That's definitely something to monitor. Thank you. Adam Makel wants to ask a video question or an audio question. Adam, please go ahead, and forgive me if I butchered your last name.
That's okay. It's fine. It's Maxwell. That's okay.
Maxwell. Oh, I'm sorry. The font was so small. I couldn't quite make it.
No, you're good. Robert, I'm curious. You talked about, so I'm from Indiana, yes. so seeing a lot of the challenges. When we see states our institutions themselves, like in West Virginia, use a metric like completions. To me, that seems somewhat odd when not just because of the other ways that the butts in seats and enrollment contribute to actual bottom line, but also we're also seeing a lot of these states, Indiana included, that is also having a conversation around smaller credentials or incremental credentials, are outside of the sort of traditional structure of a baccalaureate degree, master's degree, doctoral degree. So I wonder if you can speak to. Obviously that's a new part of a nuance that's getting lost, but I'm curious. We seem to see it, particularly from a lot of red states, both the desire for more applied, more shorter credentials, while at the same time we're using traditional metrics to measure success, essentially, when we're looking at like numbers. So I wonder if you can speak to that that I don't know tension there.
Yes, and strategic reporting is very important. Thinking about how do you structure a credential so it looks like you have lots of graduates, where you may have certain concentrations under a program, or you may say each of these individual certificates counts toward the number of credentials. Basically, whatever system is set up, we will find some kind of way to comply with the letter of it, but not necessarily the spirit. But you're spot on in that short-term workforce credentials are a very, very big deal right now. And there is that tension between that minimum number of graduates and producing people for some of those specialized fields that a small number of employers need right now.
Thank you, Adam. Did you want to follow that up, Adam, or?
No, although I think that challenge of strategic reporting, I think, is interesting because a lot of institutions, you look at the smaller short-term credentials, have ha have had a hard time figuring out their strategy, given that there is no standard. For example, there's no standard definition of what a micro credential is. When we think about for credit, non-credit, I mean, all those, everyone's kind of doing it a little differently. Now, also, we have the likelihood that those who would offer those guidance perhaps don't have jobs anymore, right? So, I'm curious what your thoughts on, is there the ability, or do you think that institutions have the ability to be able to be strategic and how they report, and what would you recommend to an institution that's trying to grow or to survive and grow in this environment where we both are being judged by these traditional metrics, but also, in the same breath, we're being asked to build new programs that might actually not look good under that traditional metric.
Yeah. Larger and more sophisticated institutions in terms of their data capacity will be able to do that because they'll have an institutional research staff that may have 4 people instead of 1. They'll be able to figure some of that out. And then another wild card in all this is federal and institutional interpretation of a policy called Course Program of Study, which is designed to make sure students only take classes for financial aid purposes that are, depending on the institution, either only tied to the major or potentially tied to the major or a minor. And that's created some jockeying within institutions for making sure their programs, particular courses, count more broadly. So at the very least, people could take their classes, or potentially they're able to build new credentials for which students can easily get federal financial aid.
Well, that's a great response. Adam, thank you for these questions, and good luck dealing with your state legislature. I appreciate that you have a red shirt. Both there's some branding, there's also the red state angle, but also, I'm afraid, the Star Trek red shirt problem. Friends, if you'd like to ask a video question, please just click the raised hand, and you can follow Adam Maxwell in his approach. Robert, we've got a couple of questions from a different direction, and I'm going to cue these two up together because I think they're very close.
Mm-hmm.
One is from Tamara Tate, who asks, what are you seeing that looks like promising approaches for surviving the next few years for Research One universities?
Yeah, the most promising strategy there is really trying to double down on increasing student enrollment. And overall student enrollment is likely to be relatively flat, maybe down slightly. But I mean, the demographic cliff is real. It affects certain parts of the country, but also we're heading toward an economic slowdown of some kind, which means that we get more older students likely returning to college. But the advantage that the big research ones have is they are in demand from students right now. And disproportionately, they're seeing enrollment gains I mean, I'm at a campus at Tennessee where enrollment is up something in the neighborhood of 30 to 35% over 5 years. And
Wow. Wow.
and quite a few of the big public flagships are in that situation where they're doing pretty well for enrollment, and they could enroll more students if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a hole blown in their budget on research or international students, they're going to pull from the wait list. So the strategy is enrollment. The strategy for some of these bigger name institutions is going to be trying to figure out where and when to go online.
Yes.
And then those factors put pressure on much of the rest of higher education as the flagships and some of the bigger private universities try to eat everyone else's lunch in terms of students.
Well, that's a question I had, and that Adam Maxwell just added as well. Is so if a given state's public flagship is doing great, if it's expanding class sizes, then it may be eating numbers from the non-flagship public universities.
Yes.
Well, that's a good answer. A straightforward one. First of all, Tamara, thank you for that question. And I think we have more to say about that as well. But along with that, Tom Hames, our good friend, asks this one. You can see why it's related. Everything seems so reactive now. Most of higher ed is pursuing a turtle strategy. Have you seen any institutions using this moment to do something proactive, or in Nassim Taleb's sense, anti-fragile?
It's been a challenge to be anything but reactive, just given how much has changed. And we're even at a point where there are colleges starting to adopt 3-month operating budgets instead of year-long budgets, just to try to be as flexible as possible. And just like the early days of the
Wait, I'm
pandemic,
sorry. How long?
3 months.
3 month
So
budgets?
Swarthmore is an example of that.
Wow.
Instead of doing a year-long budget, they budgeted July, August, September, because they have no idea what their enrollment's going to be.
Wow. Wow. So that sounds like a proactive way to react.
Yeah.
Are you seeing any other institutions that are doing something forward-looking or anticipatory or creative?
I think that the most forward-looking that institutions are really doing right now is just trying to be as financially flexible as possible. And that it harkens back to the earliest days of the pandemic, where colleges didn't know where the money was going to come from. And that was very challenging. I mean, the federal government stepped in a big way then during the first Trump administration. But in this case, the message to higher ed is pretty clear. We're on our own. So it is just trying to save cash in any way possible. And there have been some conversations in the chat about really shifting to hiring professors teaching only with multiple year contracts from Lisa. That's been a pressure that has been in place for years, but given tight budgets, it's something I think is going to continue because the cost savings are there. And more importantly, you're not making a long-term commitment because a commitment to a tenured faculty member can easily run in the millions of dollars.
Also, if you're worried about the economy changing, if you hire a professor in a field that suddenly or over time drops in importance,
Yeah.
And
it's fascinating to see the whole development around artificial intelligence, because that's a field that may or may not be around in anything looking like that in 5 years.
Yeah, I'm hearing some early reports that computer science enrollment is
Yes.
which is remarkable. Well, I guess Doug Holton builds on this with another question. Why is there always so much focus on enrollment, but so little on improving student retention and graduation rates, even though both increase revenue?
I think there is a lot of work being done on retention and graduation, that institutions know that it's generally cheaper to retain your students than go out and get new ones. And overall, nationwide, retention and completion rates have been increasing, with the exception of a blip during the pandemic. So I think there is attention being paid to that, but the metric that really gets people attention is how many new students you have. And that really does anchor your budgets for the next several years. And also, I think the retention work tends to be more distributed across campus, while enrollment, it's a point person in one office, at least at the undergraduate level.
I've referred to this in the past as a shift from quantity to quality, from emphasizing the quantity of incoming students to the quality of the accepted students' experience in terms of getting them to completion in a timely way. Doug, we just as a bit of a blurb. Well, not only is this the theme of my next book, which should be due out in a few months, which I'll be talking about, but also the Paradigm Project that came out of Bringing Theory to Practice. That's a major theme of their work, and I'd be happy to say more about that as well. Maria, please go ahead. Open your microphone. I'd like to hear from you.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, so couple of sort of finance related points made that I would like to address. So first of all, coming back to the question of enrollment, right, students may apply and even enroll, but with financial aid being so much under fire, how much of that enrollment will actually materialize, right? Because students get dropped from their classes if they don't pay whatever they owe on time, or if they owe a substantial balance to their university, they're not allowed to enroll until they pay it off. Anyway, I'm more than averagely acquainted with that situation. So that's one point that I, again, just wanted to bring to everybody's attention. And then, the argument that more full-time, multi-year contract faculty are not being hired for budgetary reasons is an old one, but we also, I think, all know that it's not the whole story, because these schools that claim not to have money, and they've been doing this for years, for faculty, other essential student services like libraries, tutoring, counseling, hire administrators at obscene salaries and waste money on all kinds of things that have nothing to do with academics. And to go up a few levels, right, at the federal level, this big hideous bill has been presented as a cost savings, but it actually isn't, because all the money that's being taken away from services like Social Security, Medicare, education, the list goes on, is being put into ICE and DHS, whose budgets are ballooning, and
Yes.
who can expect that funding for years to come, and the impact will also last, well, for many, many years. So let's, again, I'm sure others are aware of all this, but I just wanted to say it so that we don't fall into the same old patterns of accepting explanations that we know are not fully accurate.
Yeah, and I'll say that I'm concerned about federal financial aid for the fall, not necessarily because the administration is trying to cut financial aid outside of potentially the most elite colleges. It's just that they've laid off a lot of people at the Department of Education and a lot of the IT contractors. And that's really important because the way financial aid gets dispersed is it goes from the Department of Education through colleges to students. And for colleges that are financially shaky, there's an additional layer of oversight from the Department of Education. I'm not sure they have the staff to get all that done in a timely manner, which leads me to be concerned about some small private colleges being able to make payroll if the money even gets delayed a couple of weeks. because a lot of small colleges live paycheck to paycheck, essentially,
Mhm.
and their paychecks are student tuition bills. And then to the point about administrative bloat, overall, I'm not terribly concerned about administrative bloat. There are some egregious examples, like the University of Texas just hired a speechwriter for the president at some salary up above $300,000 a year. There
Okay.
are examples like that get a lot of attention. Overall, the data suggests the growth in high-level administrators is fairly modest. Most of the growth in employees over the last 20 years has been kind of low to mid-level staffers doing a lot of important student-facing work, although growth in that area has slowed since the pandemic as well.
Well, thank you. I've actually been hoping to do a session just on the administrative bloat issue. If I can get I'm blanking on his name, the author of the book who invented this. Um, Maria, thank you very much, especially for mentioning ICE. Um, and Robert, again, this is just terrific. The answers you have. In response, we have another question about another policy or another strategy, rather. Alexander Lester says that I know reverse transfer was heavily explored or promoted a few years ago. Does it still hold value for community colleges to pursue in today's landscape?
It likely does make sense that anything that can benefit students and benefit the college at the same time is a win-win. The challenge is the marketplace for students just continues to become more and more competitive. And can community colleges hold their own competing against four-year institutions that are trying to keep students in bachelor's degree programs? Or in some cases, we're seeing four-year institutions thinking about offering certificates or even some associate degree programs. So it's likely worthwhile, but there is a lot of competition in that space, not to mention the competition from all the online institutions as well.
Indeed, indeed, which are continuing to educate a large number of students. Friends, we have about 9 minutes left, and there are a couple more questions we get, but I want to make sure that we get a time for everybody to ask. Quick question from Lisa Durf, Robert, which is how do you define small institution? I put in the big beautiful bill had under 3,000 students. Is that a good rule of thumb, or do you have another one?
Somewhere in the 1 to 3,000 range.
Okay.
I mean, basically small institutions that are very much dependent on tuition. They don't have large endowments, and where missing your incoming class by even 10 students can be a major challenge.
Mm, yes, because the number is so small to begin with.
Yes.
Thank you, Lisa. Marcelo Garces asks another positive, forward-looking question. Are there some good recent examples of creative ways to generate revenue for colleges and universities that is not tuition dependent?
Donations and gifts can be an example of that. That's one that's pretty well thought out. Another one that a growing number of institutions are doing is trying to figure out how to squeeze every dollar out of their facilities. Can they hold any kinds of events or conferences? Can they send a note out to their alumni saying, you can get married on campus?
Mm-hmm.
Even little things like that can contribute some to the budget to help fill some gaps, as well as just make the campus seem a lot more vibrant during down periods. Now, the challenge is a lot of our campuses aren't fully air conditioned in the summer, or that's when we tear up the entire campus to do maintenance.
Right, right. And this is where you see some on various other strategies I've seen, selling art, for example, selling land. I saw one small conference or college had an interesting idea. They expanded their use of facilities for local medical institutions. So when they needed to hold a conference or a meeting, they could use the campus there. But Phil Katz points out, very logically, intensifying use of facilities can also accelerate maintenance costs,
Yes.
which is quite true. Um, I, I have to raise something which is perhaps an elephant in the room, although not for us in the Future Transform, which is looking just to the next year, starting with this fall. what kind of impact should we anticipate from AI? I've been very, very concerned that we don't seem to have a handle on AI cheating, for example, which might depress the value of a college degree. Um, what kind of academic responses are you anticipating for the next 10 months?
There is not a unified response
Hmm.
that some institutions are trying to have a campus-wide response that seems to be relatively few and far between as far as I can tell,
Hmm.
in part because you have faculty who are fully on board with AI, faculty who are fully not on board with AI, and faculty who are just in the middle or too busy to even worry about it. Throw on top just how slowly shared governance tends to move. We
Hmm.
don't have a clear set of policies, which will create a lot of challenges for our academic leaders as they navigate faculty and student complaints. But just more generally, I think everyone's grasping for what does this actually mean for the future economy? What does it mean for employment? And what does it even mean for our teaching and learning?
We're still going to be wrestling with that. That seems like the agenda for the next year. Um, I mean,
It yeah, in normal times, this is what would be dominating conversations on campus.
yeah.
And now it almost seems like an afterthought because of everything else going on.
Well, I wonder, do you think we should expect the Trump administration to get on board with AI in higher education? I mean, they already did an executive order advocating for more AI in K through 12. There's a lot of this in Project 2025. Should we anticipate Trump, or at least the Department of Education, advocating more AI in higher ed?
Well, according to the Secretary of Education, it's A1.
No, I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. But I mean, there is a lot at stake for the department in this, in terms of how they can use their very limited staff. And they are very much trying to automate processes that may not be fully automatable as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there definitely is the pressure within government to use AI, but there are real concerns about accuracy and also just dealing with sensitive data as well.
Very sensitive given FERPA.
Yes.
Well, I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure that we are that we give everybody a chance to ask questions, but also want to make sure that we start to draw some things together. Um, I'm we had an interesting question or prompt from Adam Maxwell, which was, do you worry that focusing on metrics like number of graduates will create perverse incentives for institutions to graduate students even if they're not succeeding academically?
It does create that incentive, but if it actually comes with providing resources to help those struggling students succeed, it can be a good thing. And also, it's really challenging to get students across the finish line if they're struggling that much, just because of the length of time it takes.
Hmm.
But yes, there are concerns about potentially shifting students to easier programs of study or shorter programs. If it's in the certificate world, shifting from a longer to a shorter term certificate. That pressure has been around for easily 20 years, and it is continuing to intensify.
Well, given all of this, um, I don't drink anymore, but now I'd be tempted to start again. How, what kind of, what advice would you give everybody here? And this is a wide section of academics. We have everything from students to presidents, faculty, and staff. What advice would you give us for being able to survive and thrive over the next upcoming year, given all of these different challenges and threats?
The two pieces of advice that I give a lot, one is just keeping your head on a swivel, trying to just keep up with everything that's going on so you have a sense of where things may be going as quickly as possible. The second is making sure you have time to step away and take care of yourself as well,
Mhm.
because we are just getting into a new academic year. And for those on that cycle, it's a time of renewal and also a time of exhaustion. So it's finding just that little bit of time to do whatever it is that recharges your batteries as well. So you're ready to take on as many of these challenges as you can. Or maybe in Tom's case, resume sniffing glue.
That's right, the classic movie. Do you think structurally, how do you think universities and colleges can best keep their collective heads on a swivel? Should they be thinking about, say, practices from 2020, where they often established, emergency committees, or what else can they do at that strategic, structural level?
Emergency committees are a good idea. The most fundamental challenge at many of our traditional institutions is we are running a 12-month institution with shared governance with faculty on academic year contracts, which makes it very difficult to move quickly. And also the incentive structures are not aligned. And that means it's really important for colleges to be able to actually provide real incentives for not just faculty, but also staff to participate in these processes so we can move quickly and move it in as unified of a way as possible.
Maybe some of the lessons we learned from 2020 will play out here.
Yes.
Adam Maxwell asks an even longer term question. Are you hopeful for the future of higher education?
In the long term, I still am hopeful in the future of higher education because just what it can do for individuals and what it can do for society. And there was polling from Gallup and Lumina that came out this week showing that the share of Americans who have confidence in higher ed went up slightly in 2025. And to some extent, the attacks on higher education do result in some kind of pushback, as there are a lot of Americans familiar with the system and what it does. And yes, we have plenty of issues, but it's also life-changing for individuals and communities. And that's why I continue to be optimistic, even though it is going to be very challenging for the next few years.
Well said. Adam, thank you for the really good question that we got to end on. And Robert, thank you not only for that very heartening and clear-eyed answer, but thank you for answering all of our questions for this past hour, giving us a really good prescription and diagnosis for the year to come. What is the best way for everybody to keep up with you? How can we all keep up with your work?
I'm pretty easy to find on a Google search. I put my email in the chat, rkelchen@utk.edu. I'm also on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. I'm not terribly hard to find.
That's true. Well, we're glad we found you this time. Thank you so much for being a fantastic gift to all of us and a great resource for higher education. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And for everybody, this is the end of our session today. Thank you all for the stream of great questions, great comments, and great thoughts. We have a whole series of sessions scheduled out for the next few months. You can head to our website at forum.future of education to learn more about those. You can also look back into our previous sessions covering some of the topics that we've been talking about. I hope everybody is, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, staying as cool as possible. Best of all, I hope you're safe and sound. Please keep thinking together with all of us, and be well, and we'll see you next time online. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.